It is absolutely my pleasure to introduce our speaker for today. That's U.S. Marshal Susan Pamerleau. I think I pronounced that correctly. She told me if I didn't pronounce it correctly that she was going to have me arrested. So I'm doing my best to make that happen. But Marshal, Susan, why don't you come up here, please? She is going to be a future resident here at the Ark.
All right. Well, I'm convinced that you all brought in the best chef you could find and the top servers to convince me that this is where I needed to be. I will tell you, several years ago, I put a down payment on the other one, on the opposite side of town. But I've already put a down payment here, so I can make that choice. But let's say that I've had enough people that have shown me around, and this is a great place to live. So, oh, Brandy. All right. And John and Vicki DePiro gave me a tour as well. Oh, yeah. And I live in a high-rise condo right now, and you all have a higher condo or high-rise than that other one. Oh. By quite a few floors. Well, I wanted to talk to you, and you all asked me to come and talk to you about the United States Marshal Service. I've now been the United States Marshal for the Western District of Texas for 6.5 years. Now, I've already made it very clear and public that I plan on, in 1 year, 5 months, and about 2 weeks, I plan on celebrating my retirement from the United States Marshal Service on the occasion of my 80th birthday. And then I'm headed north on I-35 with a caravan of friends behind me, and I'm going to San Marcos, where I'm going to jump out of a perfectly good airplane for the 246th time in my life. Of course, when I started, I was young and dumb. So, I just wanted to give you an idea, in general. These are the, talk about the Marshal Service, West Texas. Oh, hey, okay, there are 2 of them. But also how we contribute to making our communities safer. And then I want to talk about some recent successes of the great people that I get to work with. So, we are the oldest law enforcement agency in the nation. The United States Marshal Service was established in 1789 when the first Judicial Act was passed, establishing the federal judicial system. So we're the law enforcement arm of the federal court system. And you might say, I'm like a federal sheriff, and I'll talk a little bit more about that. But we've got the broadest law enforcement authority of any law enforcement agency. And again, that's sort of like the sheriff. The sheriff in a county has the most and the broadest control and authority across a county. But the United States Marshal Service, we operate, there are about 5,000 people in the Marshal Service. Compare that to the FBI that has 41,000. So I'm hoping that probably they're going to get cut a little bit, and maybe we'll get some of those resources. So a little bit of history. We cover 93,000 square miles. We're the second largest federal judicial district in the United States, second only to the District of Alaska. And the U.S. Marshal in Alaska actually has an airplane. As you can see, we cover 809 miles of the 1,200-mile border. Now, last week I was in Del Rio, and I had the privilege of hosting 8 other U.S. Marshals. They were all appointees from the Biden administration. They had all been in their jobs 1.5 to 2 years. The one with the least experience had only been in the job about 4 months, 5 months. And so we hosted them because when I got the phone call saying, hey, can we come down and can you show us, what you know about the Southwest border? I will tell you, from the Monday meeting with the chief judge, also one of the magistrate judges, their chins hit the ground because of the numbers that we talked about. For instance, the first time I went to Del Rio, right after I was sworn in as the U.S. Marshal, it was probably October of 2018. And that day, we were processing 270 illegal entries.
Oh, wow.
Now, the majority of them were what we call a 1325. That's a single illegal entry, and that's a misdemeanor. But we also had quite a number of those that were charged with 1326, and that is multiple re-entries after the first time they had been deported. That was a felony. And 270 people we processed and then either returned to their country or they went to prison for some period of time. I will tell you that we are back to doing that today. And you may want to ask me a question at the end about our involvement with the Department of Homeland Security, ICE, and also removal of illegals. It's about time, because it was, the last 4 years, I would say, have been unbelievable as it relates to illegal entries and illegal aliens in our country committing crimes. We're the second largest of the districts. In fact, the only one that is larger than us is the DC Superior Court. And it's more like a county court because they deal with all of the traffic violations and all those kinds of things that are in the District of Columbia. And I've got about, when you consider administration and deputies, got about 215. Then you add to that about 120 court security officers that are hired by contract for us. And then the second thing we've got with our task force, the Lone Star Fugitive Task Force. Anybody read about the Lone Star Fugitive Task Force? That's ours. And we've got about 110 task force officers that are special deputies with the United States Marshal Service. And what they do is, like for instance, when I was the sheriff, I had 3 sheriff's deputies on the Lone Star Fugitive Task Force. What did that give us? That gave us reach beyond the county, beyond the state line, and beyond the borders of the United States. And I'll talk a little bit more about that. But we've got 8 divisions, and they're led by 3 assistant chief deputies. So we've got the Western AOR, and that's El Paso. Then the Central AOR is Midland, Pecos, Alpine, and Del Rio. And if it were a district by itself, it would be the 13th largest of the 94 districts. Then there's the Eastern AOR, that's San Antonio, Austin, and Waco. And if that were a district by itself, it would be the 6th largest of the 94. So you can see, I mean, in fact, 2 of our division offices are larger than the 3 smallest judicial districts. So there's at least 1 federal judicial district in every state, but in big states there are more. So we've got 4 in Texas. But, you know, it's Texas after all. So this just gives you an idea of what are the tools that we use, what are the kinds of things that we do with a targeted approach to make sure that we bring the rule of law to our communities. And these are the mission areas. Obviously, judicial security, and our job is to protect judges, jurors, and the court family. I'll talk a little bit more about that. Prisoner operations. Obviously, we've got to get prisoners from detention centers, and we do that through counties and also private facilities where we have an intergovernmental agreement with the county that has the contract with that facility. And I'll talk more about that. Asset forfeiture and also witness security and fugitive apprehension. I'll talk about that specifically. So with judicial security, as you can see, we are responsible for protecting the federal judiciary. And in fact, you'll recall when the, what's the name of it? But the Supreme Court decision on abortion, and now it's the state's decision on what they want to do as opposed to it being federal. And as a result of that, there were many, multiple threats against Supreme Court justices. And so the Marshal Service was responsible for standing guard, standing a post to assure that our Supreme Court justices were not harmed. In fact, there was one U.S. Marshal, Deputy U.S. Marshal. He had just graduated from the academy, sitting in his car, standing guard, and there was a guy who came up. He was going to hijack the car and pointed a gun at this deputy. And that deputy pulled his weapon and shot this guy.
Wow.
So you can see it's not just sitting around watching a house. They had to be prepared to do what they did. So you can see the number of federal judges, prosecutors that we provide security for. And we are still providing security for others in the federal system that are due that kind of protection. So prisoner operations. Across the United States Marshal Service, we house up to 62,000 federal prisoners. And if you compare that to a county, the reason they are in our federal jurisdiction is because they have not yet gone to court, or they have been sentenced and they are awaiting transfer to another facility. And so we in the Western District of Texas have responsibility for, let's see, yesterday it was 6,431 prisoners. That's more than 10% of the entire prisoner population under the control of the U.S. Marshal Service. So you can see everything's bigger in West Texas. So asset forfeiture. And what this is when someone commits a crime and they, for instance, acquire property through that, that is a product of a criminal act. And we can seize that, and we do. When I first came into the Marshal Service in 2018, now the guy who is the asset forfeiture financial investigator is the Deputy U.S. Marshal. He's about this tall, and his shoulders are about this wide. And he showed up in Chavano Park, knocked on this guy's door, and said, I'm so-and-so, and I am here to seize your property. And he did, along with a lot of other people. But who's going to not do what you're told when it's a guy that's shoulders this wide and this tall? And so he certainly made the impression on this guy. But as you can see, the Marshal Service manages 26,000 assets that have a value of up to $7.6 billion. Now, we also sell those assets, and a lot of that money goes toward joint law enforcement operations. So those counties or those law enforcement agencies that are a part of our Lone Star Fugitive Task Force, they get some of that funding to assist them paying overtime, buying vehicles, those kinds of things. So the proceeds of criminal activity come back to us so that we can use it for purposes to continue keeping our community safe. Now, in West Texas, you can see there, and the amount that we've shared with participating agencies, $4 million. That really makes a difference. And we've got over, we've got 104 agencies that are on our Lone Star Fugitive Task Force or help in one way or another. So let me talk about witness security. And I can't talk about it much because it's highly secretive, but you figure when someone, say someone who's committed a crime, but who has information on others and is willing to testify against them, we make sure that that witness is safe, their family is safe. They may go somewhere else in the United States and their names are changed, their identities, all those kinds of things. And I would suggest if you want to learn more about witness security, I had about 2 weeks between when I was confirmed by the Senate and when I was sworn in. And so I picked up this book, and it was the modern history of the United States Marshal Service. So I start reading it, and in the first chapter, it's talking about witness security. And it talked about this book, and the name of the book is WITSEC, just W-I-T-S-E-C. And it was written by a man by the name of Pete Early. He is a personal friend of mine, and I had known him well before I came to the Marshal Service. He also wrote a book called Crazy, A Father's Journey Through the Madness of the Mental Health System. And that's where I met Pete Early when I was the sheriff. But he has also co-written probably 10 or 12 books with but a former Speaker of the House, Newt Gingrich. And So you can pick up any of those books, and what you can know about any book he has written is you start reading it and you can't put it down. It's so interesting. So I'd recommend that if you want a really good book, get Witsec and read that by Pete Early. And and so much of it he gained from talking with and being a colleague with Gerald Schur, who was the person who established the witness security program in the first place. Now, let me talk about fugitive apprehension. And I can tell you from being sheriff and being the marshal, when young men and women come into the United States Marshal Service, so much of it is not because they want to sit in a courtroom to protect a judge or the jurors. They want to get out there and kick doors in and take and capture violent criminals. What I was surprised at was it was 2005 when the Department of Justice made the decision to move apprehension of the most violent criminals from the FBI to the U.S. Marshal Service. And we do it better anyway. And if we did it like is shown on all the FBI shows on, was it Tuesday night? We probably would have lots of injuries and people who die. And I'll tell you a story about this. It was about 12, 13 years ago. And in that 1 year, the United States Marshal Service had 12 deputies and task force officers who were killed in the line of duty. They did a total stand down and looked at their tactics, looked at everything we do, and came up with the approach that we use today, and that is high-risk fugitive apprehension. And as a marshal, I got to go to that course and go through all of the tactics that we use. Basically, we want a show of force, and I'll tell you, the first one that I ever went out on, here we are in 6 Tahoes and Expeditions, and we're parked at a parking lot. We had surveillance on this guy, and he had come out in the front yard and he was talking on his phone, and our concern was he's calling somebody to come pick him up. Okay, let's roll. So here we are, it was on the south side. We roll into this neighborhood, 6 Tahoes and Expeditions, and we all get out in tactical gear, and the guy goes, "I give." But the point is, it's overwhelming force. We are very restrictive in terms of doing building entries. One, because, and I can tell you, we had one situation where we were ready to go in and then held back, and the guy literally was standing behind the front door ready to take out every single person that came in. So it's important that we practice the tactics that we know work and that save people and keep us safe. It was just about a month ago. We were in El Paso. We were doing, it was an apprehension of a guy. We had adopted the case, it was a state case, and he was wanted for aggravated assault with a deadly weapon and a whole list of other violations. And he'd gotten into a white pickup truck and was driving outside of town, small town outside of El Paso, and pulled in. It was a long driveway, and our guys came in behind him. As he got out of his car, he just turned and just started shooting. And one of the bullets went through the front windshield, of the car, and the passenger was one of our deputies, and he was shot just below the left eye. He is now in a rehab hospital in California. That's where his family lives. And he's a fighter, and we know he's gonna make it. But he's got a long road ahead of him. And I'm just thankful that he's alive, and he's a fighter, and he's got a loving family. He's got three older sisters. He's the little brother, you know, so he's gonna have a lot of help in doing that. So please keep Tony Pettis in your thoughts and prayers, because he's gonna need that for a while. So, as you can see, for West Texas, in fiscal year 23 and 24, 9.5 months of that, but even, it was pretty close to those numbers from the previous year. And we are already started on building the numbers for fiscal year 25. So in fugitive apprehensions, obviously, there are certain areas that we focus on: gang enforcement, and also we are responsible for implementing the Adam Walsh Act, which says that we do sex offender compliance operations to make sure that they are not going near schools, that they're not communicating with smaller children, those kinds of things, to assure that they are not, they're not tempted by the things that they had been before. Missing child investigations. Last year we had an operation, it was called Operation We Will Find You. And we recovered 31 children.
Oh, wow.
Now, 2 of those are the same young woman. She was 17, she'd been in foster care her entire life, and she was on the streets. And those are the ones that I worry the most about, because when they're on the streets, they're learning a lifestyle. And after we had recovered her, she was safe, then she left again. But we also recovered 3 children who the non-custodial parent had tried to take to Mexico. And so we get a lot of those where a non-custodial parent whose custodial rights have been removed try to take the children. So there's an area of responsibility that we do there as well, okay? I talked about gang enforcement. We work closely with DEA on what are called Organized Crime Drug Enforcement Task Force. And one of our deputies, a couple of years ago, in fact, he was honored with a distinguished Operations Award by the director, because he had identified the head of a drug trafficking ring in Colombia, and we were able to arrest him, go to Colombia, take him into custody, and he's in federal prison today. And he's identified 3 already in the time that I've been in this job. So that's a very important area that we work closely with our partners in the U.S. Attorney's Office and other agencies to do that. Now, just want to show you a little bit about Lone Star Fugitive Task Force and some of the things that we have done. As I mentioned, we've got U.S. Marshal, Deputy U.S. Marshals, and our task force officers. And I'll tell you, one of our best partners is the Department of Public Safety, Texas DPS. I have 7 DPS CID, criminal investigators, who are assigned just to the Western District of Texas. But across all of the state of Texas, in the 4 judicial districts. We have close to 30. So DPS is a tremendous partner. The other thing, whenever we have an officer-involved shooting, they do all of our investigations. I don't want anybody else in Texas doing our investigations except the Texas Department of Public Safety. The Texas Rangers are who do those. And they teach, you look at a lot of counties. I remember when I was going through baby sheriff school, one of the new sheriffs, it was up in the northwestern part of Texas. It was him and one deputy. They don't have the investigative skill that the Texas Rangers do. And you don't get to be a Texas Ranger just by putting in your application. You've got to be really good. And I know quite a few of them, and they are solid as they come. So you can see the kinds of things that Lone Star Fugitive Task Force has, what they're made up of. So that's what we do.
Anybody got any
Questions?
Questions?
Okay, I gave you a few hints on questions you could ask.
I got a question here.
Yes, sir. Oh, yes, ma'am.
This Venezuelan gang that everyone you read about.
Tren de Aragua.
Is it Tren de Aragua? Are they here in Texas?
Yes, they are.
And aren't they identified by some kind of tattoo?
Mm-hmm.
So if you pick up somebody who's got that tattoo, he's out of the country?
Now they are.
Okay.
Yeah. In fact, in El Paso, there's a hotel downtown. You know where Paso del Norte is? Used to be Camino de Real. If you go about 2 blocks from there and turn right, that's where that hotel was, and they were controlling a lot of what was going on in that hotel.
Got a question, remote?
Yes, sir.
General, welcome and thank you. My question is, well, first an observation that cooperation is the norm. I know with the state and this joint task force that you talked about, but we hear so much in other states and other places about sanctuary cities, not so much a problem in Texas. However, there's bound to be levels of cooperation and degrees of cooperation. Throughout your jurisdiction, where do you see issues with local and county cooperation with what it is that you're tasked to do?
Yeah. And I'll tell you, and she's doing a great job. It's Sally Hernandez, she's the sheriff of Travis County. She committed to her constituents that she would not hold illegals, or they were calling them undocumented workers or undocumented whatever. That she would not hold them, if they were charged with an immigration violation, she would not hold them in her jail. Well, we work around that. And we've got other counties that we've got agreements with that provide us jail space, or they have an intergovernmental agreement we have with them, and then they have a contract with a private detention facility. It may be Geo, LaSalle, CoreCivic, there's several of them. And so we've not had the problems. There are a few sheriffs that are have similar views, but generally overall, we don't have a lot of problems. We work through them.
Got a question here.
Yes, sir.
I had a chance to make a car trip with some old high school friends to Oklahoma. And I don't remember the name, but was there not a U.S. Marshal, a black gentleman, post-war, Civil War?
Sam Bass.
Sam Bass.
Mm-hmm.
That whole trip was educational, but the story of Sam Bass was just amazing in its depth and the things that he did in the frontier, what was then the frontier.
Mm-hmm.
There's a movie, television
Yes.
series or a movie or something I've seen, it's excellent.
Yes, and there's also, in Little Rock, not Little Rock, the city right across the state line from Oklahoma, Fort Smith. In Fort Smith, the United States Marshals Museum is now open. It just opened last year. I've not been, but everything I hear about it, it's just an amazing place with lots of history and lots of recognition, not only of our history, but also of what we're doing now.
Another question here.
Not really a question, but first of all, I want to thank you for speaking to us this afternoon and taking the time to educate us. I may not speak for a lot of people here, but my knowledge of the Marshal Service is basically Marshal Wyatt Earp and Marshal Dillon. It's very limited. So thank you for sharing what the service actually does. And I know Brandy did a wonderful job of orienting you to the ARC, as we call it, but I want to welcome you. You just made another 283 friends here.
Okay.
I guess I'm committed.
We got one more question over here.
Turn air marshals, are they under the USMS?
No, they are part of the Department of Homeland Security. Now, nobody asked me the question, but I'm gonna answer it anyway. So what involvement do we have now with President Trump's direction to remove, the worst first, but to remove anyone who is in the United States illegally? It's gonna take a long time to get all of them. Because literally there was no control over anybody coming across the border over the last 4 years. So we now have Title VIII authority, which is the authority that ICE, ERO, and Customs and Border Patrol have to remove somebody who has entered the United States illegally. Our focus, and basically what we've done, we've looked at all of the investigations that we are currently actively working to see any that have a nexus with illegal entry. And those are the ones that we are prioritizing. In fact, we arrested one just this morning. But we're working closely with ICE and ERO to round up any of those that are here illegally. And I believe I heard this morning that there was an aircraft that left on its way to Venezuela. And you know, you think about it, Venezuela, I thought they would have refused to have accepted their citizens back into their country. Many of whom, most of whom, committed heinous crimes. So they're going back to Venezuela, and we're working hard to make sure that we keep our communities safe, and that's the whole purpose.
Okay, one quick, let's make it quick.
I would just like to ask her, who protects her?
I do, and I have deputies who, if I'm in a situation, and it's like when I go out on an operation, I tell them I'm bringing up the rear. Way back.
See, there's 3 secret people in here that don't really live here. Look, thank you so much. We really appreciate it. I'd like to give you Charles from New York. We really appreciate you coming out. Thank you so
Well,
much.
thanks for the invitation.
Yes, ma'am. We're glad to have you. All right. Thank you all so much. And don't forget.